Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to talk about a series we finished watching recently, James Cameron's Dark Angel, Season 1 and 2. This is in our series of videos we're going to be doing this whole year, in case you missed the announcement video, for sci-fi and fantasy shows of the late 90s into the early 2000s, kind of a 10-year period in there. And this is one of the first ones we're going to be talking about, a show that we both kind of saw, but not in full. Neither of us had seen it in full during the time it came out, but both of us had seen random episodes. We both knew it existed. It was one of those, our type of show at the time, but we never really got into. And I don't know about you, but for me, it was a much better experience than I was expecting going in, because it's very kind of cheesy. So we're going to talk a little bit about the series. I guess start with a little bit of discussion of what the show is about. And these will not be 100% spoiler free. We're doing them very off the cuff. We're not going to get into specific details of every little episode, but we are not going to hold back from little spoilers to talk about some things here. First of all, for the overall premise, it's James Cameron's Dark Angel. He's one of the co-creators, but he was, of course, the big name. This came out just a few years after Titanic, so his name was gold at the time. His name was money.
I don't like James Cameron.
But it stars Jessica Alba and Michael Weatherly, and then we'll talk about later some more interesting characters and actors that are in it. But they are the two real main people. Jessica Alba is one of a series of bioengineered super soldiers, the X5 series from a secret government agency called Manticore. And they are the X5 series, and they were designed to be the ultimate soldiers with some perfected DNA mixed in with animal DNA, like cat DNA is one of the main things in particular. And there were a bunch of different lines of experiments using different animal DNA, whatever, but the X5s in particular were being treated from birth up through at the point they're young kids and just about to enter their teens, where they're being trained to work as a unit and be these super soldiers and develop these skills. But eventually her class, her group, 12 of them decide to try and escape.
More than 12.
Well, yes,
12
but 12 end up escaping. 12 end up escaping. She's one of those ends up escaping and into the real world. And then years later, they're trying to still hunt them down, and that's where we begin with our main character, Max. She is one of those. She's trying to hide what she is,
And live
live a normal life, and that's where we start. Her trying to live a normal life in Seattle, in the United States, in 2020, and it's actually really funny now, especially the interviews in 2020 in the United States after the Pulse, which was an event that was supposedly a terrorist attack that basically knocked out all computer systems, the electronic systems, everything in the U.S. overnight. And that's one of the themes throughout the show, which is really funny, is when they kind of rescue people or people have to go on the run or whatever, it's like you have to get them to Canada. And Canada and this is like this magical holy land. Yeah, because every single plot line, if you can make it across the border into Canada, you're safe forever. We may never hear of your character ever again because you're just safe. You're gone. You made it to Canada.
Well, a couple times they go to Mexico.
Yeah,
a couple of times that's safe, but it's not as safe.
But it's not the same. Canada is like you went to like Narnia if you go to Canada. And this it's really, so that's basically the premise. Is we're in the United States has been overnight turned into a third world country, and but after the Pulse, and there are some areas that are under much more corruption, under almost martial law in certain sectors, and Seattle is the main focal point of the series where the majority of it takes place. That's the center, and it starts off with Max, who ends up trying to rob at one point because she's using her abilities to also be a cat burglar. She has a more traditional day job, like she has an actual making money at a normal job at a place called Jam Pony, which is a messenger service. There are lots of different bike services. They can do anything, yeah, because they're kind of like the FedEx of that time period, but on bikes. They're bike messengers, and that's her normal day job, and that's where we get a lot of our side characters, and we'll get into that because
I love them.
They're some of the best things about the show. But she ends up meeting Michael Weatherly's character when she breaks into his place to steal from him, and it turns out that he is an entity called Eyes Only, which is kind of like our modern equivalent to today, like Anonymous would be the most closest thing. Yeah. And he is a voice of truth and for the everyman and freedom, and he's basically the son of very wealthy parents who are now gone, and he uses their money and his standing to be this secret. He's like this secret entity that is just broadcasting these messages, interrupting news broadcasts, things like that to bring you the truth. It's like, this is really what's happening. Don't believe, what they're telling you. This person's actually corrupt in the government, or this crooked cop, and he's that. And that's the premise of his character, and they end up working together, and of course having, falling in love. You can in the very first episode see that tension and kind of this, they take the will they won't they thing of those two characters, but they drag it out too much. Well, yes. We'll get into what happens to season 2 to make that, they force it to drag out more than it should.
It's too much.
But it works in season 1, because we're talking primarily about season 1 right now. That relationship for me works in season 1. The will they won't they, and then they kind of starts coming to a head at the end of the season, right before the very last episode of this season. So the complete first season, that's kind of what the premise is. She wants to find the other brothers and sisters of hers that did escape Manticore. That's like one of her main things. She wants to live a normal life, but she also wants to find out what happened to her like-minded siblings. And Manticore is hunting them down primarily through the character of Lydecker, who was the guy who was in charge of this program. Yeah, he's kind of like in a twisted way, their surrogate father figure. Cause he calls them his kids. His kids, yeah. He sees them as his project, his life's work, and as weapons, but also kids. He also is his legacy. He doesn't want them to die. He doesn't want them to fall into other government hands. He doesn't want anything to happen. But he also doesn't want them to just be taken and dissected, and he also wants to protect them. It's this weird, complicated relationship he has with these escapees, and that's the whole premise of that as it sets up.
Except there's a second show.
There's a second show.
There's
it's
a second
weird
show
because,
within the show.
Yes. We're talking about her day job at Jam Pony.
It's like taxi.
And it sets up a second narrative that intertwines constantly in the characters, and they meld better later on in the show, the two. But for a good while, you'll have episodes like one that's about this. Remember when she was in prison in the one episode, and she meets this girl who she wants to break out. Like, she's stuck and she wants to break out of prison, but she won't leave without this one girl who's being sexually abused by the prison warden. All these horrible dark themes, and then that is put up against the B plot, which is this goofy, funny, silly romp. It's a lot of times the Jam Pony B storyline and the A storyline felt like they were from two different shows. Both were good though in their own right. I actually think sometimes the Jam Pony one was more interesting.
Sometimes they're better.
Yeah,
the way that they're written.
Some of the characters are great. Yes, they were really good, and I think the two standouts though are
Original Cindy.
That's what I was going to mention first. Original Cindy, who is one of the group of friends at Jam Pony, that's one of the central group, who is such a standout that eventually she kind of becomes the replacement, that becomes her best friend or replaces her original roommate. The character is gone. She really becomes an important character in the show and interacts with people more. She's a more standout, and the other ones become a little more background. Original Cindy is great.
I love her.
Fantastic. She is just great sense of humor, strong character. The actress did a really good job portraying her, because we were watching the extra features, and she was saying when she first read the character, she was like, I don't know about this, because the way she first read it is
stereotypical.
Seems stereotypical, she's African American, super ghetto with the lingo, and she's also a lesbian, and it seemed like it could have been this horrible stereotype character. Yeah. But as she was saying in the interview too, talking about it, she's like, but I went into it to try and see what I could do with the role, and she did a great job, because she made it so much more than what that blank slate was, with these stereotypical outlines of who the character is supposed to be, turned it into an interesting, complex character.
Yeah.
And the other one, to me, that's not. The other ones are good comic relief and stuff like that, and support characters, but normal. The other one, their boss, Normal, who, as we said, the show's a lot like Taxi in a weird way. This section, he's like Danny DeVito's character. But he is, again, someone, I think it's the same thing as Original Cindy, could have been a caricature.
Yeah. He
is very, even from his the Drew Carey haircut, he has that, and the look, he looks like he's straight out of the 50s. He's an outspoken, very Republican white male, Christian.
Well, doesn't he say Bush is his...
Reagan. Reagan's his hero, is a picture of Reagan and his and George Bush Sr. George Bush Sr. The two of them. George Bush Sr. is the one he mentions a lot too.
Yeah.
And those are he's very much, he seems like on the surface when you first kind of meet him, it's going to be, oh my god, a caricature of this old white guy Republican. But he ends up being a really complex character.
He's awesome. Up until the last episode.
He was fantastic.
Beautiful.
And sometimes he'll surprise you. You think he's going to go one way with, when he dates the girl and finds out that she's, transitioning. That she, and
Yeah.
he ends up being totally okay with it. And
Yeah, he's-
in a way that like is contrary to how you think the character's going to be, given
Yeah.
the summary of like if you had read a little blurb who this character was, and you start finding more depth in that character too, more complexity. And again, those two stand out while the rest are very interesting in their own right. They're still very flat characters or comic relief, whatever.
Yeah.
But those work. But that's what's interesting about this show is like, okay, it's not perfect, but the premise is interesting. Jessica Alba, who is not normally someone I would say I was a big fan of, actually works for the character, does a good job. Michael Weatherly, who we both love from NCIS, is really good as well. And some of the supporting cast is alright, it's good. And they start weeding out, even before the end of the season, they start weeding out some of the characters, some of the side characters that don't really work, and putting more screen time on the characters that do. And it's like, okay, season 1, it was pretty
There's
good.
some really dramatic, really deep, heavy episodes.
The problem is that every once in a while,
you get
they're
the heavy episodes.
along with a funny, goofy story that doesn't work. But they start finding a better balance, and it's like, I love this first season because it sets up a really great show.
Yes.
It's like, okay, this is an interesting, action show. It's an action sci-fi show. I wouldn't call it lowbrow, but it's one of the. But it's a show that
It's
like
for everyone.
yeah, it could have dipped into into that territory. It could have become more lowbrow, but it was setting up something that
It was also setting
was
up
good.
for like a long series.
Yes,
This seems like the beginning of like a saga.
This seems like
a long.
This to
long
me
thing.
was a very enjoyable. Like I give it like 7, 8 out of 10. That I thought was setting up like a 9, 10 out of 10 show. Like this was good.
It's just the beginning.
It's imperfect, but they're figuring it out, and it's going to be great. And that's what I like is when a first season's like, okay, it's good. It's not like a brilliant TV. Like it's not like some of the greatest stuff ever written. But
there's
it's fun.
things
it's
there.
genuinely entertaining.
You know it's gonna be.
Some interesting characters. Premise is awesome. They could really build it. And it ends with it's book noted with it starts the first episode, which was basically a movie in itself. The first episode,
it was
the
a
premiere,
standalone movie.
the premiere
Beautiful.
sets up the premise, and it starts with her escape as a kid through the flashbacks and things, and it ends with her being recaptured, and it sets up a much more interesting, complex second season at what the setup is going to be. And you could also get a character, Nana Visitor from Star Trek Deep Space Nine comes
Towards
in
the end,
as the end as Lydecker's character becomes less of just a villain and more almost they team up with him at some points or whatever. You get this other villain character who actually in a way represents the government, represents the establishment, represents secrecy, and doesn't give a crap about his kids. As it's like the evil part of Lydecker without the more complicated
the emotional
attachment. And it sets up a really good premise and into going to a second season where we thought, okay, it's going to build off of it and be great. And it started off okay while she was recaptured and they were trying to reprogram her, and a lot of other people thought she was dead. And it's sometime later, and a lot of things are collapsing. Like Michael Weatherly's character is in a just deep depression, and he at this point we didn't even mention how he at some point was shot and had spinal cord damage and they couldn't walk anymore. But we didn't even mention it, I don't think. But it ends up he's in a real low spot. Everyone around her thinks she's dead and gone. Some time has passed. She's stuck at this place that she is terrified of, where she was created and being reprogrammed. And it starts off on solid footing, and eventually we get to the point where she tries to escape, and eventually she does escape. And in that time there, we meet two characters that become essential to the second season. And until they started getting their act together in the second half of the second season, for the first half of the second season, two characters,
the only thing
that made it worth still watching.
And original Cindy.
As a good side character, but these two kind of took over for me.
Oh,
and
yeah. They could have their own, like, buddy cop movie. I'd watch that.
One was Jensen Ackles was in a season 1 episode as one of her escaped brethren who had gone insane and couldn't handle the real world and became enraptured in this idea of what they call the blue lady, because of a picture of Mary Magdalene they had been given by a janitor, I think it was originally. And they kind of created their own religion to kind of figure out the outside world. And they surrounded it, and like they were as kids trying to figure out the actual world. And one thing they did was create this religion around the blue lady, and he was finding churches and things, and like mixing himself up, and he was making blood sacrifices, like of teeth and things like that, to the Blue Lady. And he was a killer. She ended up having to kill him, which was very dramatic. Her own brother or whatever. But behind the scenes, they loved working with Jensen Ackles so much they wanted to bring him back, and they started coming up with another character who was going to be a rival slash foil slash possible love interest for Max. But they're like, shoot, we really want him, but we already used him and killed him. So it ends up being a next series, a genetic clone. So they created the idea of the genetic clones of those original kids of the X-Fives. And his character comes in, Alec, who I always have to remember to call him Alec because
he's just Dean.
He's just Dean Winchester.
He's just Dean Winchester.
Straight up Dean Winchester. And we both really like Supernatural, especially the beginning seasons. And
he even has like the car.
He ends up late as the show goes on. He has similar clothing, the
clothing is
type
exactly
of car,
the same.
His attitude, his performance, the way Jensen Ackles does the more smart Alec, like funny elements of this character. It's like a version of Dean in this world. It's like if Dean Winchester was put in this world, this post-apocalyptic future. That's kind of how Dean would be.
Yeah.
So it's really, we loved it. It was great.
And he does like schemes and like scams people.
Yeah, he's very schemy, scammy after number one.
Seasons.
But he has some of the best standalone, like, story-focused episodes that give more depth to that character. He's not just, like, he's this adorable, like, trickster kind of guy, but there's something deeper to him that we get to explore. And the other one is kind of a double-edged sword.
It's you.
It's a double-edged sword because he's great, but he introduces something that is part of the downfall of the show.
Yes.
In her escape attempts, she ends up finding the basement underneath the facility and encounters someone named Joshua, who is the first ever creation by what they start to find out, Sandeman, the original creator of this manticore type thing. And he is a human with dog, and he is the most adorable person ever.
He's so cute.
He's amazing. She befriends him, and they end up escaping. In her escape plan, she destroys Manticore, but ends up releasing what at first is like,
seems like
dozens.
dozen?
Yeah, what at first is dozens of these creations, and over the course of the second season ends up being like it's got like 1,000, like endless. And it starts off like with an interesting premise because then you have them in the real world, and she becomes like a big sister to Joshua, who he has to hide, and he finds his father, their creator's house, and he ends up living there, and you get these funny interactions with him because he starts meeting more for human characters and becomes friends. Hi, original Cindy, and like starts to love, and he ends up becoming an artist and meets this woman who runs an art gallery, is buying his painting and things. He ends up having a girlfriend who's blind in like one of the standout episodes of season 2, without running too much. Great episode. But the problem is, after that point, it starts off on a really good premise, but until you get to the very end of second season, it's good episodes interspersed amongst a bunch of crap.
Like the Halloween one's your favorite.
Oh, God, that's the worst episode of the entire show. But what happens is, once they set up this premise of all these biogenically engineered beings escape from Manticore, they start turning it into the Creature of the Week type episodes.
Yeah, but in like a really stereotypical
way. It's bad.
What were you thinking?
Because the first season, it was much more about this super soldier program.
Yeah, they were humans.
It was much more grounded. It's just humans with altered DNA who had barcodes on the back to identify them with increased strength and agility and all that different, and heightened senses. And it works. Here we go into this fantastical, mystical, weird territory with lizard men and mole creatures, and it becomes ridiculous.
There's mermaids and vampires.
It becomes a caricature of what the first season was. It really does. And the writing really takes a dive. And then you add on top of that,
really takes a dive.
They started something at the very end of season 1 with this mystery of where did this all start from, and it turns out from like a 1,000-year-old breeding cult trying to create the ultimate human, and that's where the concept became the adding animal DNA as we add technology. And the idea behind that is good. Mm-hmm. The execution is horrendous, and the new villains, aside from the government trying to hunt them down and cover up Manticore, it becomes this weird thing with these superhumans, and they start messing up. They're consistent in the first season with the abilities of the X-Fives. Their strength, what their abilities are, what their limits are, was very defined. In season 2,
Season 2 is like Gandalf.
It depends who's writing it,
like
who's directing it.
It doesn't.
It depends.
There's no.
Yeah, it depends. Like, what does the plot demand? That's what their abilities are. It can go up or down. It can swing. She's like fucking Superman one moment. The next moment, she can't. She's doing stuff that like any old badass in a cop show could do. Like, it's all over the place, and it's really disjointed and doesn't work. And then as society starts seeing more and more of these creatures, because they've created panther ladies and all that stuff, like Manticore, this small facility has like a zoo of thousands of these things apparently.
And they were only supposed to be like
set up.
a couple of them in the basement.
Yeah,
like
it was supposed to be this
the anomalies
handful.
in the basement.
Yeah, the abnormal, these weird mistakes, and that they kept in the basement, and there are thousands of them now. And it's like a different show. They took things in a different direction, and what happens is then they try and turn it into the X-Men, where it's like. You don't want these mutant freaks, and you don't want them dating your daughter.
There's even like graffiti that says like no mutants, and
yeah, it starts turning into this
you
X-Men
see people
thing.
behind the cameras, like when the news reporters, and they're like, mutants are freaks.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like,
and of course you get the super religious people out against like their abomination.
Yeah,
and you get these horrible like the vampire episode.
That was the worst to me.
The metalheads where it was like a Three Stooges.
Yeah, but they were
sketch.
okay before that.
Ugh. But it ended up being terrible. But Joshua, that character, had some good standout episodes. And to me, it's I'd say the middle 50% of the series for me was carried by Jensen Ackles, who that's great, but it's not good when he's not one of the two main characters. And then all of a sudden, in the last, without looking at the episode titles, there I'd say maybe 4 or 5 episodes, like the very tail end.
We saw something at the beginning.
They start slightly getting better. Like they start reining in some of their more insane out there ideas. It becomes a little better. Like it's still not quite as good as it could, but it's getting its act together. It's like, okay, they could pull this together. And one of the things is we started seeing in the credits, first as a consultant and then eventually as a full-on producer, is Ira Stephen Bear from Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
Suddenly starts showing up in the credits who wasn't there before, and things start getting a little bit better. And you can't say like he automatically like by himself single-handed, but like there are elements we're saying
well, that's
that
just
like
the only person we saw that we recognized. I'm sure there were others.
There were elements that were outside that were coming in towards the end that were kind of like
reining it in.
Yeah, like the ship has gone off course. Let's kind of course correct a little bit, and it started getting better. I'm like, okay, a lot of potential. And then the last episode comes, and James Cameron himself comes in to direct the last episode. It was an extra long episode, so you have. They finally course correct the show. They get it back on track. They start setting up. There's character acting a lot like Hellboy is one. What's his name?
Mole.
The Mole.
He has a cigar. He's got the gun. He's ready.
They start reining in all their more wacky ideas, and they kind of solidify what the heck are we doing with this show now? What direction is it being taken? And they have a fantastic. The last episode was genuinely one of the best in the entire series,
and it makes you excited.
It makes you excited for a continuation. They set up. Just a great premise for season 3. It was like, all right, season 1, good, setting up a better show. Good, setting up better. Season 2, drop the ball. Like, where are you? It's like they couldn't decide where the show was going. Very end of season 2, we figured out what we're going to do with the show. It's not quite where season 1 seemed like it was going to go. A little different of a show, but it could really work. And it ends then. Then it's done. End of season 2. It sets up what could have been an awesome season 3. It really sets up a much better show, a higher quality show than what we'd seen before. It really does a good job setting up. I love all the characters. Every little side character is given a great little like part in it.
Yeah.
Like everyone, like people that like
even some of the
Jamponi.
Yeah, some of the
Jamponi people falls off. Great setup. Then the show's canceled. And what's even worse about it is. It's one of those shows that you'll never see an ending to. You never get the remedy. You never get to see all these mysteries, all these questions that weren't solved yet because they're saving them for season 3 or 4 or whatever. We will never see them. But what's worse is that the show was actually picked up at first, advertised to the point where James Cameron himself was saying he went home and celebrated, and they were excited about season 3. The actors are ready. Everything's great. And then the next day, according to every report and in the interviews. Within a 24-hour period, it's canceled.
They reneged
Yeah, they said we're all right. We're set up next season. Season 3. All right, the show's picked up again. 24 hours later, oh, never mind.
Just kidding.
Change our mind, and it's done. And James Cameron was like, I was pissed.
Wow.
But yeah,
and we know why that was.
Yeah,
because it was Fox.
Yeah, Fox. But yeah, so James Cameron's Dark Angel. Far better than what I remembered from those handful of episodes that I saw. Again, not super highbrow television, but interesting premise, fun world, good acting in some of the more main characters and a couple of side characters. Season 1 was them finding their footing, and they found it, and it was good. Season 2, kind of fell off the steps when they were trying to find their footing, but picked it back up at the end, and then it's over. So that almost made it worse.
It did. It did.
Because I don't know, for me, I don't know for you, but for me, because the show was progressively getting goofier and worse and lower quality writing as season 2 went on, I was more okay with the fact that it was
because you're not as invested in what's happening.
But then at the very
storyline.
end, it becomes good again. It's like, crap. But yeah, so that is the show. Is there anything else you wanted to add to the experience?
No.
But that was it. And then we are also going to talk about then there is a PlayStation 2 video game. And we ended up finding out as we were researching stuff for the show, there were 3 books released. So we went ahead and ordered those, and we're going to read those, and we're also going to come back and talk about those. So James Cameron's Dark Angel. If you don't mind not getting an ending, it's worth checking out.
The pulse brought the nation to its knees. In the fear and weakness that followed, the military began aggressively researching new types of weapons. Weapons that would forever change humanity. I was one of those weapons. A woman and a warrior. Trying to understand who I am. And how I can belong.
Next up is the Dark Angel video game for the PlayStation 2. And this is a pretty standard action-adventure game for the time. It feels like a cross between Tomb Raider, and the game that really came to mind the most while physically playing it was the action-adventure game on PS1, the Xenowarrior Princess game. It feels a lot like that game control-wise. It really feels a lot like that game with a little bit of Tomb Raider mixed in, some stealth mechanics. It is very straightforward but enjoyable. It's very entrenched in Season 1. It has a lot more to do with the Super Soldier program. It's less about these strange creatures and other creations at the bottoms of the bowels of the labs, although there are a couple boss fights with creatures like that where the DNA was spliced with different creatures, and it really is just boss fights. But most of the game is running through different stages, either first starting off in your Jamponi uniform, running around the streets, and eventually you're infiltrating different laboratories, beating up tons of faceless bad guys, or sneaking around and just with the end goal of make it to the end of each stage and collecting things like card keys along the way to open locked doors, or eventually blowing things up to get rid of obstacles in your way. It's the same kind of pattern over and over again, but it was enjoyable enough and was short enough. It was only maybe 5.5, 6 hours to go through the whole thing, that I was never bored with it, even though it was fairly repetitive. There was enough change in the environments, it was broke up enough by the occasional boss fight that it was fun to play for what it was. It's not something that, if you weren't a fan of the show, it's not a game that you'd pick up and think was very enjoyable, unless you found it at, for like $5 or something, worth your time. But as a fan of the show, it was good. It also features Jessica Alba and Michael Weatherly. They are doing all the voice work for their characters, so it feels very authentic and definitely feels like a good companion to the show. It's an alternate storyline, a standalone storyline about her having a copy of Max, one of Max's sisters, different from what they introduced then in Season 2, but one of her sisters that actually decided to go off on her own and kind of found her own military organization that is the main target, and the main plot of the game is to overthrow it. Sort of another smaller Manticore in a way. So it really is just that Max fighting Manticore, of Michael Weatherly helping around on the computer and doing his eyes only spiel. It's a smaller, condensed version of that against this different organization, but it shows a lot of familiar places from the show, new places, and it just is a very actually decent companion piece. Not a brilliant game in any stretch of the imagination. Gameplay is very simple, but it's straightforward, it's fun, it's not long, and it's the kind of thing where if you like video games and you are a fan of the show, it is worth your time checking out. And now I'll show you some gameplay so you can see how things kind of work out and get a sense too of some of the voice acting, some of the banter and things that really make it feel very tied into Dark Angel.
I just got an email from someone called Scylla. She says you have a twin sister.
Scylla.
Max, tell me, who's Scylla?
Scylla was one of us. Just another kid being trained to be the ultimate soldier.
A covert government organization known by the symbol I is conducting aggressive military experiments on humans in an attempt to create the perfect soldier. I has been taking control of research and technology facilities across the nation to conduct these experiments.
So let me guess. You guys are the hot new boy band? I'm kind of in a rush, so can we make this quick?
Set new frequency to 106.3 for messages.
Hey, you! Stop there!
See, you're in my way.
And we are back with the third part of our Dark Angel review. This is actually like a month and a half later, because as we had stated at the very end when we were talking about the series, we ordered then the 3 books that were involved.
Which are hard to find.
Yes, they're harder to find now, especially that last one was the one that was hard to find. There's also like a fan, like one of those like fan
fiction,
books, like
yeah.
one of those
Or
kind of things,
fanzine.
fanzine type things. So there's a dossier with eyes only, whatever. But these are the 3 actual novels, which we'll talk about briefly here, especially these 2. The first one was okay, Before the Dawn. This one is a prequel. I'll let you talk about it a little bit here. We both read them. You read them first. This one after reading these 2.
Yes,
I liked it a lot less.
This is our least favorite
Yeah.
of the 3, but it's still really good. It has some really interesting things. I think this would have been a couple of different episodes.
Some flashback
Some
stuff.
flashback
yeah.
things. We get to find out how original Cindy and Max met for the first time, which was nice. I really enjoyed that. And I've never heard of this author before. He obviously spoke to, it's very apparent through all these that he spoke to Cameron and understood where Cameron was going to go with the series and
Yes.
where he came from with the series, but he does a really good job.
And they introduce some things with like Seth and some other ideas that come up in these later on. So I feel like this was kind of necessary.
Yeah, this was
it would have been
to set up.
necessary plot. Yeah, to
Yeah,
set
I
up.
think this would have been in a couple of different episodes in the next season.
Yeah.
Just like flashbacks, and I think she would have found her foster sister eventually, or found out what happened to her.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one wasn't bad. It
It was
was
okay. It's definitely worth hunting down.
set it, and
but
I think it's better that this was the first one that we read, because like
Yeah.
it was nice. I liked Moody a lot better. Like I liked her LA family a
Yeah.
lot better than you did. I think
it
I
was,
enjoyed that.
interesting, but
I
don't
think
know.
it was. I think it was interesting, and it resolved itself. So
It added something.
it was
It's a
fine.
good
I
little
think it added-
standalone. Like this is like if you go and pick up any random standalone like Buffy book or Star Trek book or any of those kind of ones where it's like it's decent or like Charmed or
I
whatever.
think he
it's
did a good job, because some of those you can tell it's not the same caliber of writing.
Right,
I think
yeah.
this either Cameron vetted this guy or Cameron.
This
like,
guy, he's done a
edited
lot
this
of.
a little bit,
If you look
but-
at the author bio, he's
Yeah,
done a lot
but-
of like novelizations of.
But there's a lot of
movie
people
shows.
we own a lot of those books, and
Yeah.
sometimes they're not very good. They
They're
don't
not
hold
as
true.
familiar.
They
This
don't
is-
understand
yeah.
the characters. They don't understand the world.
Yeah.
This guy definitely understands.
Yeah, this guy, you can hear the voice of the characters in your head when you're reading. Like original Cindy really stands out. Like the author definitely
And
liked
Joshua.
her. Like you can
I
hear them. The
Joshua.
way they speak is it's correct. It's true to the characters. But again, that it's like that I know for a fact I'm never gonna reread.
Oh,
It was
I might.
decent. I think you might. Yeah, but I will never reread these two. I might if I revisit the series, say 10, 15 years from now again.
Oh, yeah, these are-
I'll reread the books. 'Cause
These I
this
feel like
is-
are super canon. Like,
Yeah,
these are
because these are the third season we never got. They're just part one and part two directly just continue one off the other. This is season
Yeah.
3. I mean, literally the beginning of this is the ending
it's a
scenes
recap.
of
Yeah, it's a
of
recap
season
of-
2.
yeah.
It's that Freak Nation, that extra long, that last episode is basically
love
their
that, yeah, that
concluding
was-
movie. That's how this starts, Skin Game. So they get a little more into that. I mean,
Skin Game was great. Skin Game, it felt like an episode, and like
Like
it
a
was just
multi-part and
it felt like
multi-episode, yeah.
but it was so layered. It was like it was formatted in like an episode type way.
Yeah.
And I loved Kelpie. Kelpie was so good.
it really worked well. And
The characters were great.
what really, without giving away too much if you're going to watch and whatever, what these two books did within 2 books, they answered most questions that you had.
Yeah, I'd
they
say
wrapped
like
up most.
80%.
Yeah, but all the main storylines that were happening because there's so many things like the issue with that's keeping the Max and Logan from being together is finally there's some sort of.
Yeah.
But even though it
Yeah,
wasn't
it
great, there's
wasn't-
resolution to it. There's
was-
resolution to what is going on with the cult, the genetic cult, and like what is
I
happening.
think this one
what,
sets up for
what
the
is
next
Max-
season though.
Yeah,
Like
finding her mother and things like that. Yeah,
It just sets it up.
But the storylines that they introduced and built up to by the end of season 2 were wrapped up in
I
this.
just
And
wish
the-
Sandeman was in
yeah.
the last one.
But the
I-
integration of
I loved
all
it.
the people into regular society that started like they really they did a good job within 2 novels of wrapping things up.
And I thought Jensen Ackles did a great job in this one. His
Alec,
his
he
acting was great.
You could hear him too.
It's great.
But that's really a great nod to Max Allan Collins. Did a really good job of
Yes.
very authentically writing something that he did not or didn't create. He himself did not
Yeah, I
write.
think-
He got the voices authentically.
Yeah, I think as far as like he's definitely one of my favorite. Like as far
Yeah,
as
that's
like
good, yeah.
the novelizations, he's really good, and I would totally read if I saw his name on something else. I would pick
Yeah.
it up in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
'cause
so the first one's definitely good, but if you are going to watch the series because it was canceled, without completely resolution,
You get-
these are the
you get a
2 that are
resolution.
essential. This is season 3. Like this is good, and
it gives you some backstory,
it gives you some
and
backstory.
it sets up
It
some
sets
things.
up these. Yeah. So this one, I'd say, it's good because it sets up a lot of stuff that comes in these. But if you are just searching for like, make sure you at least get these 2 because
I like
these 2 are
Skin
season
Game
3.
the best.
Yeah.
I mean,
think
this
so.
did the best job. The last one did the best job of wrapping it up.
Mm-hmm.
But Skin Game just feels like an episode. It feels
Yeah.
like I love the story. It was
Yeah.
just really well done.
Yeah, so this was a good way. This is the conclusion. So even though the show was canceled, we got something.
Just
to
lost
wrap it
my
up.
head there for a
So,
minute.
That was with Joshua. But he was he was another character it was very true
He was
to the character.
really
so,
good. Yeah.
They're well done. So overall, that is our experience with Dark Angel, the show. I talked about the video game.
So much better
the
than I
books.
remembered.
Yeah, it holds up more than I
Yeah,
expected it to.
this definitely holds
Yeah.
up.
And again, like a very good show of its time, but holds up better. And there's some things in it that it's almost better in a way because of how 2020 and 2021 have turned out.
It is really
Like,
funny that it's
But yeah, so
2020.
yeah, the game and then ending with the books. So if you get into the series, those are all the different avenues to explore it in, and that is what we thought of this series. We'd love to hear,
What you
what
thought?
you think. If you experienced it, did you watch that back when it was on TV? Just getting to it now, and if you can find it on like a streaming service or wherever, or again, there's only 2 seasons, so it's cheap to find on DVD, so you can check it out. It's very accessible. That is James Cameron's Dark Angel.